Did you know the Roman Empire was once so massive? Its borders stretched from England to North Africa. We tend to think of it as a monolithic structure, but in reality, it was a series of brilliant innovations, brutal decisions, and surprising acts of humanity. Get ready to learn how a few key figures rose, challenged, and ultimately reshaped the Western world. Every great empire needs a compelling origin story, and for Rome, that tale begins amidst whispers of divine destiny. The foundational myth centers on Romulus, whose dramatic destiny is said to have unfolded in 753 BC. While the details are steeped in legend, the twins Castor and Pollux, the she-wolf Lactuca, the sacred spot marked by the Palatine Hill, what remains undeniable is the fierce spirit of a people ready for greatness. After the initial founding conflict between Romulus and his brother Remus, Rome was solidifying its identity as something uniquely formidable. This wasn't an instant superpower. It evolved over generations through the struggle and resilience we recognize as the Roman Republic. These early citizens were pragmatic farmers and skilled fighters, constantly negotiating their relationship with powerful neighbors like the Etruscans. They quickly learned to build structures, both literal aqueducts and political institutions, that could endure centuries of upheaval. From a small settlement near the Tiber River, Rome gradually developed that fierce ambition, transforming itself from a minor Italian city into the dominant force of the ancient Mediterranean world. The Roman Republic wasn't born conquered. It rose through sheer ambition and unparalleled military discipline. Imagine legions marching across daunting terrain, not just following orders, but driven by a belief in their own destiny that was utterly infectious. Their genius lay not only in the formidable shield wall and disciplined formation, the basic structure of the legionary, but in adaptability. They were masters of siege warfare and engineering, capable of building stone roads and aqueducts that linked every newly acquired province. The conquest wasn't a single massive battle. It was sustained pressure against varied powers, from resisting Celtic tribes along the northern frontier to challenging established Mediterranean states like Carthage. Figures like Scipio Africanus exemplify this might, leading forces to stunning victories that solidified Roman dominance across North Africa and beyond. Politically, they perfected a complex system of governance that allowed for immense power without collapsing into immediate monarchy, at least until it did. This ability to absorb diverse populations, from the Italian hills to the Levant coast, and integrate them under Roman law is what truly made their empire so vast and resilient, defining an era of unmatched human achievement. While many great Romans came before him, it was Gaius Julius Caesar who truly reshaped the destiny of this republic. To talk about Caesar is to talk about genius, a potent mix of unmatched military tactics and an almost supernatural charisma that captivated both soldiers and senators alike. He wasn't just a skilled general. He possessed a magnetic force, always knowing exactly what word or gesture would win favor among his followers. His conquest of Gaul gave him unimaginable wealth and the fiercely loyal legions that became the backbone of his power. From this accumulated strength, he recognized that Rome could not be run by squabbling aristocrats in the Forum. The ultimate move, the calculated crossing of the Rubicon River in 49 BCE, was a moment of irreversible defiance, a political gamble paid for with civil war and crowned with unparalleled authority. That single act transformed him from ambitious politician into absolute ruler, shattering the traditions that had governed Rome for centuries and setting the stage for something entirely new. The supposed perpetuity of Rome began to fracture under the strain of its own success. Suddenly, the legions, once loyal only to the Republic's constitution, realized they were ultimately loyal to men, to the ambition and promise whispered by charismatic generals. Power ceased to flow from the Senate, instead surging in a volatile cycle of military might and political betrayal. We watched history replay itself. Cycles of brilliant leaders who overstepped their bounds, plunging Rome into brutal internecine warfare that spanned decades. Consider the towering rivalry between Pompey and Caesar. It wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a fundamental disagreement over whether Rome needed careful governance or absolute rule. From bloody engagements to dramatic political maneuvers, every major figure seemed determined to seize dictatorial glory. The consequences were devastating, tearing apart the Republic's delicate balance as generals amassed private armies across Gaul and Italy. It became clear that no amount of law or tradition could withstand the raw hunger for supreme power. The era transformed from one of philosophical debate to visceral bloodshed, marking a profound loss of civil peace forever. After the decades of bloody civil war that fractured the Republic into competing warlord states, something radical finally emerged from the ashes: the reign of Augustus. He was a master strategist, someone who understood that military might alone could not sustain an empire. It required consensus. By skillfully maneuvering political outcomes and eventually consolidating ultimate power, he ushered in an era so stable historians call it the Pax Romana. For 2 centuries, Rome enjoyed an unprecedented peace, allowing its vibrant culture to truly flourish. Suddenly, trade routes opened up across vast distances, from Britain to Egypt, becoming arteries of commerce and exchange. Imagine legions of merchants traveling safely, knowing that the roads were secure under Roman law, a level of stability previously unimaginable in the Mediterranean world. While emperors continued to change, keeping order was maintained by an expanding infrastructure and a unified legal framework. This era wasn't just about marching armies. It was really about setting up the systems, the administration, the economy, and the cultural belief in Rome's destiny that defined Western civilization for centuries afterward. It wasn't just a single catastrophic blow that finally brought Rome down. Rather, it was a slow, insidious creep of structural weaknesses. The sheer size of the empire itself became a crippling burden, turning Roman might into an unrelenting logistical nightmare. To maintain those vast borders, from Hadrian's Wall in Britannia to Mesopotamia, Rome demanded resources that simply began to deplete its reserves. This overextension meant military payments and provisioning ate away at private wealth, fueling constant economic instability. We saw the insidious spiral of inflation take hold, where emperors debased the coinage, flooding markets with increasingly worthless metal. Farmers groaned under crushing taxes designed not to fund infrastructure, but merely to keep the corrupt bureaucracy afloat. Politically, loyalty fragmented. The Praetorian Guard, once solid protectors, became fickle masters who frequently auctioned off the throne to the highest bidder. By the 3rd century, civil war wasn't an anomaly. It was a brutal and predictable rhythm, draining manpower and attention from actual existential threats. The empire, rich in history but weary in spirit, found itself caught in a self-inflicted cycle of lavish spending and desperate instability. The threat to Rome was always present, but it wasn't until the late 3rd century that the external pressures escalated from manageable raiding to something truly cataclysmic. What followed was not merely a series of skirmishes at the frontier gates. Rather, it became an irreversible tide of migrations. Germanic groups, often pushed westward by others like the Huns, began moving in massive waves, a demographic shift that would fundamentally reshape Europe itself. Consider the Goths, who initially broke through Roman lines multiple times, culminating in their desperate march toward the Roman heartland. These were not organized armies following clear objectives. They were complex populations seeking survival in space, making negotiation nearly impossible for even the best Roman generals. The subsequent treaties and uneasy alliances often crumbled under localized stress, turning necessary allies into devastating enemies almost overnight. By the half-second of the 4th century, Rome was faced with a logistical nightmare. Managing millions of unfamiliar people settling within its borders proved far more taxing than simply defeating them on the battlefield. This sudden inability to distinguish between refugee and invading force is perhaps the most telling marker of Rome's final decline. Yet despite its staggering achievements, the aqueducts, the laws of Justinian, the very concept of a vast empire, Rome contained the seeds of its own ultimate destruction. The final gasp came not in a glorious battle, but through a slow erosion of power. The Western Empire truly crumbled in 476 AD when the Germanic king Odoacer deposed the last emperor. It was certainly an ending filled with fire and melancholy spectacle, transforming the organized Mediterranean world into scattered kingdoms ruled by Visigoths and Vandals alike. But the story doesn't end where the imperial purple faded. Instead, it enters a profound period of quiet endurance. What truly survived wasn't merely grand armies or triumphant Caesars, but the sophisticated infrastructure of ideas, codified law, Latin language, and early Christianity. These foundations did not vanish into dust. They were picked up, adapted, and carried forward by the people who remained in the West. When we study anything from modern justice systems to the structure of our letters, we are still reading an echo of Roman genius. The empire may have fallen, but its remarkable legacy is what ultimately helped build the foundations of Western civilization itself. The fall of Rome wasn't a single event. It was an extended process, a slow, inevitable cycle. But the story matters because Roman ingenuity left blueprints for governance, law, and engineering that still shape our world today. History reminds us that even the greatest empires are always subject to change, adaptation, and sometimes collapse.